Hi, Kajal, and welcome to the Natural Birds podcast. How are you today?
I am doing well. It's really early in the morning. So this is how I'm starting my day, and I'm looking forward to chatting with you today.
Yes, beautiful to have you here. Can't wait to hear your story. So let's dive on in. Tell us about becoming pregnant. Was that a conscious choice, or did you just find out you were pregnant, or how was it for you?
It was definitely a conscious choice. I knew I've always wanted to be a mother, but I knew that when it was time to become a mother, I wanted it to be a very intentional rite of passage for myself. And prior to becoming a mother, I've had a lot of work on myself, looking at a lot of my own trauma, looking at a lot of my own patterns and wounding. Um, and so it was just a very I've always felt a huge sense of, I don't want to use the word responsibility, but a responsibility because it's bringing another soul into this world and you're being their guide. And so I just knew it had to be very intentional in my point to get to that place. And so I knew there was a baby and I felt my daughter for a while. I didn't know if it was her or him or her, but I felt her for a while. And when it was time, I got pregnant on the first try. So it happened very quick, very fast. And I think it's really symbolic because I got pregnant at 33 and I also gave birth to her at 33. And 33 is like considered a master number and a huge time of transition right after your Saturn return. So it came very quick. So I was very excited that it happened very quickly.
Yeah, right. And when you became pregnant, did you know how you wanted to birth? Had you considered that before falling pregnant, or did you discover that during your pregnancy?
I always knew I wanted a home birth.
Mm.
I've was very I'm already very natural minded, holistic, live a very um I've just wanted everything to be very organic and natural. I wanted that. I wanted the experience of understanding what my body was doing. And for me, birth was just an extension of how you live your life. So it wouldn't have been any other way. So I knew that even before I got pregnant. I had watched a lot of home birth videos, documentaries about medicalized births. And for me, it was this is where I feel safe. It is safe is at home. So this was a no-brainer. So I knew that there was no other option for me.
Mm. Beautiful. So, how did you go about finding your midwife? Or did you do that? Did you go on a hunt for your midwife?
So it's interesting because I had just moved to Washington State. And a week later, I found out I was pregnant. So I was about 5 weeks when I found out. And I had a feeling I was pregnant before I took the test. I just knew because something about myself felt different. Um, and when I was out there, it was a very seamless process. I just did a Google search and I found this woman's phone number who was like one of the original traditional midwives who had trained with Ina May in Tennessee. And she was like a wise woman. And I reached out to her and I said, I'm pregnant. I would like you to be my midwife. Because I was looking for more of a traditional approach to midwifery because there's a lot of nuances now. And so I found her and she wasn't available. So she recommended somebody else who I met with. And for some reason, I knew she wasn't going to be the woman that helped me birth my child because I had this feeling that I wasn't going to be staying here long.
Okay.
And so during my pregnancy, I actually moved across the United States twice. So it was a very transitory time in my life. And when I ultimately moved to Ohio, is where I gave birth to my daughter. I found a midwife that was only 10 minutes from where I was living. And it just was so serendipitous and so miraculous. And as soon as I met her, I knew she was the one. And as a first time mother, I wanted someone who was traditional minded, but also had a very strong understanding of the mystery of birth, but also like the physiological process. And I wanted someone who could also like intervene if something were to go wrong. So she had like best of both worlds. And she has like birthed like over 1,000+ babies. So I just felt super comfortable and just knew she was the one. I didn't have to do any other meetings. It was like a knowing as soon as I met her.
Yeah, you just knew. I love that. That's so beautiful. Amazing. So, did you have any early signs of labor approaching for you?
So no, I didn't. It's so interesting because my daughter was born on her due date. I say that in quotations. So in the entire time I was pregnant, I was like, that's not going to happen. That doesn't happen. And her due date happens to be the winter solstice as well. So, um, so it's just weird looking back that I had known the entire time. But around like 5, 6 days before, I just started to feel different. Something's shifting. Something's happening. And I remember I was getting chiropractor adjustments in the third trimester. And my chiropractor was like, something's happening. Like I can sense something's happening. I think you're gonna give birth in the next week. And so I remember the one of the first signs was is my body having to vacate. Like I was having to go to the bathroom a lot. And then on the day before I gave birth, I remember it was like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I was looking out the window and I had like this first twinge of it wasn't like a contraction, but some sensation in my lower back. And I was like, that's interesting. That's really interesting. And I had this urgency to print photos of myself pregnant for some reason because I wanted them framed in the room I was birthing in. And I remember my husband and I walking to get them printed. And I kept having these like surges come that they didn't feel like contractions. And I had to stop and just feel the sensations out. And then when I was standing in line, I remember feeling very antsy and wanting to move. And it was very different because I'm someone who's very like still and like stands still and not very fidgety as a person. I was finding myself fidget. I was like, okay, this is interesting as well. So I got back and I called my doula and I told her this was happening. And she's like, let's just keep an eye on it. Seems like something might be happening. And then later that night is when I felt the first surges come on. And I was really excited. It was happening. And I went to bed that night and I was like, I might wake up with full blown labor. Who knows?
And what happened?
So what happened? I ended up, so I sat in the birthing room the night before, just because I knew something was shifting. So I wanted to like honor the 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 maiden process for myself. So I did like a little ceremony and I set an intention for the birth. And I went to bed and about 2:30 in the morning, I woke up with the strong surges. And it was like they were really powerful, very intense from the beginning for me. There was no like build up. And I woke up and I remember telling my husband, I think something's happening and I'm having these strong contractions right now. It's like, okay, let's keep an eye on it. And that went on for like an hour. And I remember having to go to the bathroom. And I went to the bathroom, they really subsided, and I was able to get about 2 hours of sleep, 2 to 3 hours of sleep. So then I woke up again about like 5:30, 6 o'clock. I called my doula and I called my midwife and I let them know this was happening. Um, and my doula, we had prepared her to come at 10 a.m. that morning. So she came at 10 a.m. and my midwife just said, check in with me and I'll let you know if I need to head over. So when I woke up, it was about 8 a.m. And at this point, labor had started. I just knew it had started. I was getting these really strong surges and we were timing them and they were about like 4 to 5 minutes apart already. And by the time my doula got there, I was in it. I was in it. And I don't have this like story of like it started and there was this buildup. Mine was just intense from the beginning. There was no soft like opening to this. It was just, I'm in it.
Well, it sounds like you're like the evening and the night was your soft beginning in a sense, wasn't it?
Looking back at it, yeah, it was like a preparation for what was about to come.
Yeah, yeah. And that's it. It's like I love asking this question because it's always so curious to see what women, experienced and what they kind of perceived. Because some of these signs are like feeling dreamy or inward or nesty or just sensing something like you were just feeling that there's this shift happening. And I think this is really beautiful for other women to hear as well, like how different each woman experienced the days leading up to labor and
Hmm
birth. And I mean, some just wake up and bam, there's, the act of labor, and some can just really sense this subtleness happening on different
hmm
layers and levels. And it sounds like you had that. So, all right. But in the morning, it just kicks off and your doula arrives. How are you moving with your sensations?
So my intention, I think for me, the intention that I did and like the intention work, the energy work around it, the mindset work around it before I actually went into the birth portal was it came in so much handy during labor, actually. And my intention for birth was always surrender. I was going to surrender to the sensation, surrender to the process. And I didn't want to be afraid. I chose to birth in this way because I wanted to be completely in tune with what my body was doing. And it was for me very much a visceral experience of my power as well. And because my sensations were so strong and intense, it was I had to rely on that like perspective that I chose to go through the birth portal more because it was, for lack of a better word, it was painful. I'm not going to say it was like, it was painful. And I think how painful it was a bit overwhelming for me, especially having never given birth. Um, but I just was like, okay, this is my power moving through my body. This is like I imagine like the wave coming in and the wave coming out. And so one of the things I did a lot was rely on the breath. I practiced a lot of diaphragmatic breathing, and one of the things my doula did with me is she actually had me before I went to labor. We met a few times, and she actually had me hold ice cubes in my hands, and she timed me for a minute. And she said, "Okay, go through this like it's a contraction, it's a surge. What were you gonna do?" And she just watched my face, and I focused on my breathing. And it's interesting to say that when I focused on my breathing, what was happening in my body felt less intense.
Mm.
So I remembered that from the ice cube experiment, and I was like, okay, as long as I use the breath to move through this, I'm creating a sense of expansion in something that's contracting. So it's like I'm meeting it in a way that's giving it more space. So that was like the technique I moved through. Um, and honestly, I think surrender, the biggest thing that I did was I was able to turn my mind off, completely off. And I had no ounce of fear in my body. I've never felt so fearless in my entire life. So I think because of that, I was able to progress so quickly, so fast that everyone was very surprised, actually.
Mm, right. So when your doula came, did she do something special or did something change for you? Or how did you move with her in the space?
She just held space for me. There was a lot of space holding. We did try the Rubizo, uh, and I wasn't having back labor, so I didn't like that feeling at all, actually. But she really just let me be. She really was intuitively reading me, and she just let me be. And I didn't really use any techniques per se. Um, I realized I knew this was going to be a very inward process for me. And more than anything, I needed people that were space holders.
Mm,
So it was a lot of just being with me, sitting by my side, holding my hand, uh, feeling like she was with me. in the contractions as they were coming. And my husband was actually there as well. So they were both like on each side of me.
Mm.
And we were walking up and down the steps. I was on the birth ball a lot, leaning over. For some reason, I didn't want to be sitting upright. I just, the entire time, what felt most comfortable was like leaning over and taking the weight off of my hips and pelvic floor. That was very uh, supportive. But I just remember going into more like a meditative state and just really, I've never also felt so present in my life, just so present and so aware and so with each contraction. So it was, I don't even know how to describe it at this point. It just, it felt like I was like moving out of this time and space and going somewhere else.
And was that kind of already from the get-go? Was that as you got deeper into the labor and birth experience?
And it actually just got deeper as the labor progressed. It got just deeper, and by the time my midwife arrived, it was about noon, and she wanted to check me.
Mm.
And one of the things I remember telling my doula, my midwife, and my husband, I said, I don't want to know the number because throughout this process, I don't want to be taken out from my head. I want to stay in my body. I want to stay present. And if I knew the number, it would start to become a, oh, I'm not moving fast. I'm not for it would just become this like the mind would take over. So I really was like, please don't tell me. And I can tell you this now. But when she checked me at noon, and mind you, by the time she arrived, my contractions were so intense and they were probably a minute to 2 minutes apart.
Yeah.
They were never like I didn't have like 5, 10 minutes of a wait between them. They were always a minute to 2 minutes apart. When she checked me at noon, she's like, oh, you're only a centimeter dilated. That's what they told my doula and my husband. And at that point, I was still losing pieces of my mucus plug. So it wasn't even coming out yet. And I was like, and she looked at me and and like, I could tell by her face that she was like, oh, you're not as far along as you feel like you are. Like your body
Yeah.
is not matching how far along you are. And that was that. And she said, keep going. So I kept going, and we did a lot of like stair walking in my house. Um, and she she checked me again. No, I think after that, she actually told me to go for a walk. So it was like a really crisp, beautiful winter day, sunny day. And I remember going for a walk. And I was very upset at her that she told me to go for a walk. I was like, how am I going to go for a walk? I'm going through all these like contractions that are just coming back, back and back. Like they
Mm.
were just like, it's kind of like a stormy sea is how I describe it. They were just coming and coming and coming. There was no relief. Like, and she's like, oh, it will slow down, and then in the end it will build up. And that never actually happened for me. It was in it the entire
Mhm.
time. And when we went for a walk, it was the longest walk of my life. And I was like bending over the tree when the surge would come, and they would hold me. Like my husband and my doula were on the walk with me. And then when I got back in, she checked me again this time. And I was what, maybe like 4 at that point.
How long time had
And
passed at this time?
we were about like 2:30 in the afternoon at
That's
this
pretty
point.
quickly though, like for a first time mama from going from 1 to 4 in like 2.5 hours. I think
Mhm.
that's quite quick progress. Yeah. Yeah.
And by the time this time she had checked me, I remember having like a moment of weakness on the couch because it was a lot. It was very excruciating, and they were not backing off. They were not subsiding. They were not tapering off. They just kept
Mm.
getting more intense. And the other midwife came and sat next to me, and she just reminded me my intention again. And I
Mm.
remember in that moment, I was like, well, I'm not going to the hospital to get an epidural. This is not happening. Like, that's not what I want. And it was this moment of like checking back in with myself of like, okay, are you going to do this? Yes, you are. Okay, you can do this. You're going to get through this. And I also was like, so focused. It like refocused me. And she told me to then go get in the shower. So I got in the shower and my husband's like spraying my back, my belly. And I'm like, this isn't helping me. This is terrible. Get me out of the shower. So we got out of the shower and I walked up to her. She was sitting at the dining table. I was like, do something. Like they're so intense. And at that point, she's like, go upstairs to your room, lie down, and try to take a nap. That's what she told me to do. And I don't remember what she did, but she came up there with me and she gave me some tincture,
Hmm.
something to help my body relax more. And I don't know what it was, but she gave me this tincture, and this is about like 3 o'clock, 3:30 in the afternoon now. And I was up there, and I this is where I feel like something happened that I cannot even describe. So my husband's there, my cat's there, my doula's there, and I'm lying on my side. And this at this point they were a minute apart and they were coming so fast. So I would go in it for a minute and I would go out for 45 seconds, in it for a minute. It was just like this pattern that went on. And I don't know where I went. I don't know what was happening. All I know is when I was in it in the minute is I felt I was in the body. And when that minute was done, I was like out of the body. It was like this in and out happening. And looking back, they both were like, you were just like completely in a trance state. It was like beautiful to watch what was happening to you because we can't even describe it. And I can't even describe it, what was happening. But it was like I was thoughtless. I was completely like there, but I was moving in and out of the experience because I think there was no fear, no tension, no projection of when the baby's going to come, how fast this is going to go. I think I was like living surrender at that point.
Mm.
Just complete trust, complete surrender, like completely at one with like God and like the mother and the mystery. That's what it felt very expansive, but also very like, oh well, yeah, this is still happening. We're still trying to get a baby out.
I love that. Sounds beautiful. One of the gifts that labor and birth can give you, that trance-like state.
And at that point, I think I was like this for about an hour. And it was about like 4:30, between 4:30 and 5. My midwife came and checked on me, and I was 9.5 centimeters dilated. So I went from about 4 to 9.5 very fast.
Yeah.
And it surprised everybody. And they were like, oh my gosh, because she was expecting me to give birth around midnight.
Mm.
Um, and then I guess she gave birth in the water. So they had to get the birth tub ready. And it was like a frantic to get the birth tub ready. And I remember having this feeling of, I have to poo, I have to poo, I have to poo. And I remember getting up, and as soon as I got up, my water broke on my bed
Mm.
and the whole gush came out. And at that point, I knew. I was like, okay. So I was like, I looked at her. I was like, I went through the transition because I remember hearing stories of the transition of how like you get to that point of it's like that crossroad point where it's like really, and I was like, I went through the transition. They're like, yeah. I was like, but I didn't have that experience that I heard so many other women go through. Like that that didn't happen. They're like, my doula and my husband were like, we don't know where you went, but you clearly went through it. Like it was
Yeah.
happening while you were laying on this bed going from 4 to 9.5.
Yeah. And that's the thing, labor and birth is not linear. And one of the key things is that surrender, like body, mind, and soul, like really a deep allowing and letting go, allowing that force to come through you. And sound like you did that. And that's when that happens, like that. Yeah, it's magical how it can go like that. No, there's just no, even though modern medicine wants to say that there's this linear thing, it's just not at all. And
Mm-hmm. And I remember at that point, after I had my water broke. I remember having to go, like the sensation of having to go to the bathroom just was very strong. So I was in the bathroom, like pacing, and I was like, she's gonna come out. She's coming out. She's coming out. And the birth tub was getting ready. And it was about, at this point, it was like 5 o'clock. The birth tub was ready. So I got into the birth tub. And this is the first time the entire day that the contractions subsided. I got like maybe 30 minutes of just downtime where I was just in the tub listening to my birth playlist that I had made and just in there. And it's crazy because the concept of time was completely gone. Like I'm giving you these time frames, but they're I don't even know if they're accurate because
Yeah.
all I know is when my daughter was born and when I got into the birth tub. But like leading up to that point, the concept of time was gone. It was like everything had melted away, and what was there was the experience I was in, and that's what I was being asked to do is to stay present with it and surrender to the process happening in the body.
Yeah.
Um, and when I got into the birth tub, it was like, oh, that was the first time I was able to talk to anybody. Up at this point, I hadn't really talked to my doula, hadn't really communicated with my husband. I was like, oh, okay, can someone tell me what happened? Like what's going on? And that's when I got to like check in with what was happening.
Yeah, that's what can happens when you shift from like dilating and opening and those kind of contractions to the in
Mm-hmm.
between before you get the bearing down kind of energy. You can have this a passive second stage or this moment of grace when you get to
Mm-hmm.
rest and like catch your breath. And it sounds
Mm-hmm.
like because you had had such an intensity for such a long time that was such a beautiful pause for you as well to gather your strength to actually then birth your baby.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that was just a really, really good moment to just check in with everybody else in the room. And they were like, you did great. Like it's almost over. Like you're getting there. It's almost done. And I was like, what? And that's where it was like, whoa, I actually got to that point. And it was like the home stretch. And I think when I heard them say that, I was like, okay, like I'm gonna do it. Like I'm gonna do this. Like I'm here. Like if I've gone through the intensity that I have, I'm going to get through the next part, which is the pushing the baby out. And again, as a first time mom, you don't know what that feels like, right? You're just, you're just like, okay, let's go do it. So I was in the birth tub and they started to come back, the contractions. And, um, and I just went through this. And my husband was in the back of me. And I was actually on my hands and knees, so like over the birth tub. And he was in the back because he was going to catch our baby, and my doula was in front of me, and it was beautiful because I got to hear this really beautiful moment with her. And I had told her, I was like, all I want to do is just viscerally feel my power. That's what's really important for me. And I had told her this, and she kept affirming that to me. She's like, feel your power, feel your power. And she was hugging me, so she was embracing me. And like I felt really safe and really held in the birth tub, like the water. It was just like I'm very supportive, very just gentle, softening that was in the room. And so the surges came back on, and I actually had a hard time like bearing down and pushing. So this is where the only time my midwife intervened. This is the only time I would say she gave her opinion about anything that I should do. And she was like, she just basically like, this is what you need to do. Just like bear down and like move the energy into your hips and like push. So I was like, okay. So I did that. And I was like, okay, this is what it means. Cause it was like my body didn't immediately go into pushing the baby out. Like I had read that sometimes that can happen in physiological births, like your body just starts to push the baby out. It wasn't the case. I kind of had to be a little coached to do that. So when I started to do that, I was like, okay, this makes a lot of sense. So we were doing that, and at this point, it was that again that like trance-like state came back in. I was like in it, pushing and making these very primal, raw sounds, and then when it was not the contraction to push, I was like the room was quiet. I was quiet, and I just like was so inward. So again, it was that like trance-like state coming in. And so we were pushing, she was crowning. And so the midwife noticed that something was blocking her head from crowning. I had a cervical lip. Is that what's called cervical lip?
Did
The
they
like
check
a little
in?
like a little fold of something.
Mhm.
And she had a feeling that was happening, was preventing her head from fully coming out. So she actually had to go in during a contraction and move it out of the way.
Mm.
And when she moved it out of the way, her head came out. Her head came out, and then her head was out. And I was just waiting for the next contraction. I think a minute had passed at this point, a minute or two. And then her whole body came out. And I still remember the feeling of her whole body coming out. It's like a squishy, slimy, like fish feeling coming out of me. And honestly, it was so relieving when she had come out because I was feeling the ring of fire, like the burning, the intensity. Um, but again, it was just like surrendered. I was in the space, I was doing it, and I had like such a determination that I only pushed for 34 minutes. And she was out, and her papa caught her and he held her under the water for like a minute. And then he slowly brought her up. And since I was on my hands and knees facing away, I had to do like a quick maneuver. And then he put her on my chest. And I mean, I don't know how to describe that feeling, right? It's like it was one of the most beautiful feelings of my entire life. And I just remember all I said was like, I did that. I did it. I did it. And she was there and she was like, now she was crying. And it was just like the energy had shifted and everything felt like it was a release. And I started crying because it was just intense, intense, intense. Push her out. And then it was like, I'm on the other side now. And it's like, as soon as I pushed her out, um, and she was on my chest, it was like I was back in to like my body, so present and so like me again, as weird as that sounds. Because I think throughout the whole birth time, it was like this trans like surrendered state where it was like Kajal was like moving in and out. And then as soon as I pushed her out, it's like, okay, we're back. We're back in the body. We're back here. This is the baby. Like it's time to beat her.
Beautiful. And in the, I'm a little bit confused about, you said that she said you had a lip and then she removed it and then instantly the head came out. Is that what
So
she
she
said?
it's a cervical lip. That's what she told me it was, like a little flap of skin that was preventing her head from coming out. So during contraction, she moved it out. And then during the next contraction, her head was it was able to come out then. Because what was happening, she was crowning and the lip was preventing from the head to move out of the birth canal. And when she moved it, it was then more easily able to come out of the birth canal.
Because I'm just curious to unpack this because so when the head is crowning, there's not really much, you can't really get a finger in up to the cervix because the cervical lip is like up inside the vagina. The cervix is quite high up, like literally like high up. So you wouldn't really be able to, and it wouldn't make sense for the head to have come through had there been a lip. And then actually this lip business is kind of debunked by, for example, Dr. Rachel Reed. She writes beautifully about how this lip thing, and it's an American thing that I hear a lot, and I'm just a little bit like about this. And so I'm a bit confused how, so if your baby's head, because it takes time, it's like the turtling, right? The turtling of the head coming more and more and more, and then eventually it's kind of sitting there, and you can't really do anything inside while the head is crowning. So that's what I was wondering how that could happen, that she could get in there for the cervical lip and then the head was born. Was there a period in between, do you mean, maybe where she did that and then you did kind of
So
the
I'm probably assuming this happened before her head emerged out of my cervix
yes,
because it
exactly. So that
yeah
that's inside the vagina and then the
side
head
yeah
would drop down and then you would do the pushing, which is should take time because you really want to stretch all that tissue before it gets into the crowning position and then finally birth the head. So
Yeah.
it didn't just happen that you birthed the head after she removed the
No,
lip.
no,
It must
no,
have
no,
been
no, no,
time
no.
in between.
So
Yeah.
yeah, this is where my like memory is
Yes.
blank.
This is
So
why I
all I
wanted
know
to
is
unpack this for anyone listening because I was like, no, that doesn't make sense.
no, no, no. It wasn't like her head was there and there was something because I know at that point
Mm,
you can't
mhm.
get in.
Yeah.
No, I think it was when I had first got into the birth tub and my body's preparing to push.
Yeah.
And she had coached me a little bit to push, and I was pushing, and she was like, "Something is not like you." She was like, "You've gone through many contractions now," and she intuitively felt like something was um, not in the way. So she
Sure.
checked
Yeah.
during a contraction. She felt it's like a flap of skin or something. I don't know what it is
Well,
exactly,
it's
but
just
she
the
just
cervix, really. So it's
yeah,
just
and
the
she had to
cervix.
move it out of the way. That's what she just literally moved something out of the way. So
Yeah.
then it gave the free, like it opened it up for the head to start coming down. So it
Sure.
wasn't when she was crowning.
Yeah. Yeah. So that makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense
Yeah.
now, your story. And I just want to say on that that's one way of doing it. And,
Hmm.
it's of course up to the woman if you feel like you want that to happen. But the other option is that you just wait. Like there's
Yeah.
nothing wrong, right? So it just means that the cervix is not fully dilated, really. And so
Mm-hmm.
you can intervene and push it out of the way, which can be really painful. I don't know how you experienced it, but that's one way. Or you simply just wait. Like, because there's no
Hmm.
timeline as we know in labor and birth. So
Hmm.
the other option would just be hang out in the pool. It will open,
Hmm.
like it will do that. You've opened so far amazingly, right? So all is but well, you're doing amazing. So there's two
Hmm.
options there. There's not just one. It's not like something was
Hmm.
in the way. It would have gone away at some point
Yeah.
as you
Yeah.
just follow your instincts and just give it time, right? And the
Yeah.
same with, you not feeling the bearing down kind of urge could be because the head was still high. It wasn't actually down further
Hmm.
down in your birth canal. It's when it drops down that you get that involuntary urge to push. And it needs to come down quite low in the birth canal. So it needs to go through the cervix, which it
Hmm.
hadn't. So it makes sense that you weren't feeling pushy because the head wasn't down past the cervix yet, right? It hadn't fully gone down yet. So it makes sense that you had a pause. Nature gave you this beautiful time of grace for you to catch your breath. And most likely, had you waited, it would have been a longer time, might have been another hour if you had maybe not
Hmm.
done something, right? And whether you like that or not, like that's your choice. If you want to make it faster,
Hmm.
then you more intervene. And if you want to let just your body do it in its own time and your baby, then it will happen. It just
Hmm.
takes maybe longer. And so I just
Yeah.
wanted you to know that and for everyone to know that a cervical lip is not pathology. There's nothing wrong. It just means simply that you're not fully dilated. And
Hmm.
had I maybe been the midwife, I'd been like, what do you want to do? Like, there's nothing, I wouldn't actually, myself and many of my colleagues wouldn't suggest removing a lip. It would just be like, just keep doing what you're doing. Your body's doing great. Like, it'll take care of its own lip. Like, the lip is nothing. And even so,
Yeah.
like, um, if the baby wants to come through, it can come through that. It's not
Hmm.
about centimeters either. Like, yeah, we're not linear. So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, it was interesting. I think at that point, I was like, I think that assistant was actually helpful. And she did ask me, like, do you want me to move this out of the way? And I was like, please do.
yeah,
Because at that, I think I would reach the point where I was like, I'm ready to get the baby out. Like I'm ready. Like because my contractions were so intense the entire day. Um, I think that little assistance was just like, yeah, sure, why not? And it wasn't painful at all, actually, for me. I didn't even feel her move it. So whatever it was probably very minor.
yeah.
Um, but I think it was looking back, it was helpful, but like for a future, to know what you just shared would be really helpful to know, okay, maybe this is just my body not ready right now to push. And
Yeah.
that's what was really interesting is like, I'm not getting that sensation to push. And it's interesting. It wasn't until she had actually moved whatever that piece of skin was that the sensation to push came on.
See,
Uh,
exactly. It's because that made
yeah,
the head drop down
yeah,
And there's a point down
Mhm.
below in our vagina that gets triggered as the head touches that, and it needs to drop into the vagina
Yeah.
for that to happen. So it
Yeah.
makes sense. And again, there's no right and wrong. It's like your birth, you decide, how you want that
Yeah.
to unfold. And it sounds like for that, time you were happy for that to happen. And I'm glad it didn't hurt. For some women, it really is excruciating. So it's good
Oh
to
yeah.
know that yours didn't. So that's also great for women to know, like if they choose to say yes, that it could hurt, it could not hurt. And it's your choice.
Yeah. And it's interesting because my daughter came out with her hand like this.
Compound hand, yeah. When you
Yeah, she had her hand like this. So
mm,
in the final when her head was coming out, I actually had to move my leg up to
right.
just create more space. So that was actually very helpful. It actually prevented me from tearing. I actually did not have any internal tears at all.
Beautiful.
But she might also add that my midwife was also holding a hot compress with onto my perineum.
In the water.
Yeah, when I was pushing.
Mm, mm.
So that's something she was doing to support the perineum. And through, I think, the way that like, I was very intuitive about like how I wanted to birth. So I felt really this need to like lay over, like be on my hands and knees. And when her head was coming out, I had to like put my right leg up, just something about the way she was coming out, which I think helped with everything kind of staying intact. And
Yeah,
I
yeah.
only ended up getting a tear in my outer labia. So that was the only thing that happened
Oh,
on
the
the right
hand.
side. Yeah, because of the hand coming out that way.
Yeah.
But that was the only thing that I remember.
Love that. And that's it. Like when you're in it, you're so intuitive. You know exactly what you need to do with your body to navigate, to help your baby navigate your outlet,
Mm.
right? So I love that for you. So baby's on your chest. Did you choose to birth your placenta in the pool as well?
So at that point, I did. So I was in the pool for about like 5 minutes, and then I think there was blood in the pool at that time. And so one of the other things is that during pregnancy, my hemoglobin level was low.
Mm.
Um, and they were tracking it, and I think they have a number they needed it to be. And I was like, nope, there's no option. Like my hemoglobin level is what it is. And I had an intuitive feeling that it was going to be fine. So she had a fear of me hemorrhaging after the birth because it was so
Right.
low. And I was I was doing things to get my hemoglobin levels up, and but I knew my body was not going to hemorrhage. Like I was going to be fine. And my midwife was just knew that going in. And so after 5 minutes, she actually was like, she got me out of the pool because she wanted to make sure I was going to be okay. So we got onto the bed, and that's when I birthed my placenta, I think 15-20 minutes after, onto the bed. And I did not hemorrhage. It was perfectly fine. I knew that going in. And actually, in where I was giving birth, it's actually where if your hemoglobin level isn't at the certain marker point, you have to have a hospital birth.
Yeah.
I did, and my midwife didn't tell me that at the time. And after the fact, she told me, I knew that you were going to be fine. I had faith. And looking back at it, I just was like, she like trusted me enough and
Mm.
my body enough to like hold that intention for me as well. But because that was like on the radar, she was like, she had me get out of the pool like quicker than she would have
Yeah.
wanted.
Yeah, that makes sense to just monitor. It can be hard to estimate the
Yeah.
loss in a pool. So it makes sense to do that just to make sure so that you can catch it all and just make sure that it's not too much. So that makes sense.
Mhm.
Beautiful. Amazing. And did you snuggle up in bed afterwards? Were they caring for you after?
Yeah, so I got into bed, and my daughter, her placenta umbilical cord was attached for about 3 hours after birth. And I was snuggling my daughter and talking to my husband, talking to my doula. My midwives had left me alone. They just like they They moved me to the bed after I delivered the placenta. They left. They just were left. They went downstairs and they were like, "This is your time. We'll
Mm.
be back in a few hours to do the rest of the newborn screening or whatever they do."
Yeah.
And yeah, I was just in bed with my husband drinking water because I had not eaten anything at all, um, or drank much because I just like that's not, I was just so inward that I didn't even think about doing those things, nor did I want those things. But yeah, my daughter was there and we just let her organically latch onto the boob. And it was just a very peaceful time. And she was born in the evening. So like about 6:48 when she was born. So it was like we were all like also winding down to go to bed. So it
Yeah.
was just like a very natural progression of the day itself. It was a
So
very cozy
perfect.
time.
Yeah. So perfect to birth at that time and then have a good meal and then actually have your first sleep because babies usually have their longest sleep that first 24 hours. And then after that, you don't really get any kind of long
Hmm.
stretches. And so it's perfect to do that at night, isn't it? If you have that birth, that you
Hmm.
get to actually have a few hours of rest after birth.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
beautiful. And
And it
if you
was,
had a first-time mama in front of you right now who's about to have her first baby, and she really
mm,
wants to have a natural and empowering birth experience, what advice and pearls of wisdoms would you give to her?
I would say that the birth starts before you get pregnant, before you go into the birth portal. Like, I think it's really important to be in tune with yourself, your intuition, your desires, your wishes, and what makes you feel safe. I think the word safety just keeps coming up again and again. And I'm not pro home birth or pro anything. I think I always tell everybody is that to give birth where you feel safe, where you fully feel like you will be held
Yeah.
and honored in the process that you're going through, because it isn't a big initiation to bring your baby earthside. Um, and so intention, I think, is really important to just get very clear on if you have any fears, what your ideas about birth are. Are they your own? Are they learned? Um, and just be like, get to the bottom of what you want, what's important to you, um, and what this means to you, and what you want this to mean for you, and how you want to go through this process. I think that's really important, setting an intention around that and being very unwavering around that, because I'm the first person in my family, I'm the first person I know of in my circle that has given birth in this way. And there's a lot of people who will say a lot of things, like it's unsafe, it's da 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 da, and you have to be very clear in your decision, because there's a lot of outside influences and people wanting to give their advice and opinion, and they're well-meaning, but oftentimes they're uninformed. I
Yeah.
think that's really important. And I think being in touch with your intuition and what feels right for you and the intention that you've been setting is really important, because it's like the way you birth is the way you live. So it's like how you live your life is really translates to how you end up giving birth. And like I'm someone who's always been very clear in what I wanted.
Mhm.
So that actually came to help me when I gave birth, because it's like, okay, everyone can have their opinion, say what they want, but I'm going to do what I want because I have to be true to myself. I have to trust my intuition here. Um, and so for me, it was really that like, I'm going to honor myself and I'm going to trust myself. And I will know if something needs to be tweaked, something's changed. The answer is going to come from within me. And it's a great time to do that because the veil is so thin. You're so connected in a way that you've never been in your entire life. It's just like, and if you listen and take time, you will know how you should birth or who your midwife should be, and like how you're going to go through labor. It's just, it's going to come from all within you. The answers are within you. And I think the other thing is surrender. Surrender, it's like knowing what you want but giving it up at the same time. It's like this paradox, like not holding too tightly to like this is how I have to birth. It has to be in the birth tub or it has to be here, da da da. Like just give up all your ideas of how the birth is going to go or like how you're going to go through labor, but also be very vigilant and clear on what you want and like holding those two at the same time. And I think the more you can surrender and the more you can be present in your body, welcoming each contraction, welcoming each sensation, being with it all, giving this pain a purpose, knowing that this every time you have a contraction, it's like pushing your baby out. Like your body is working for you, your body is on your side, you and your body and your baby are doing all this together. And I think for me, surrender is what allowed me to have the birth I had as a first time mom. It truly was like a letting go of complete trust and faith that my daughter will be born in the way that she needs to be born. And yet, I, as a mother, can really honor my intuition and stay in touch with what I'm being told is the path for me and how everything's going to unfold.
Mm. Yes. Preaching my gospel, both of those things absolutely rings so true for me. I so agree with you. And it is that paradox. And I guess it's like when the first contraction hits, that's when you switch into surrender mode. Like, don't surrender in pregnancy in a sense of like not preparing, right? Like, that's when you want to do all of that and get informed and everything. And then as soon as the first contraction hits, you have hopefully found the right people, you're in the right place, and you have everything set up that will support you to have the dream that you desire. But when you do have the first contraction, you surrender that dream and you trust in that
Mhm.
birth of that baby and yourself in the process that needs to happen. I love that.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I would say is for everyone to pick like maybe an affirmation, some kind of intention that they work with throughout their pregnancy. It could be anything. Like mine was I trust my body, I trust my baby, I trust my body, I trust my baby, I trust God, I trust this process of birth.
Mm.
Whatever yours is. And what I did, because this is just like me, I listened to it every night before I went to bed. I was programming my mind
Right.
before bed every night. And I think just working with that throughout the pregnancy, I had like 10 months to just get that into every cell into my body. And when the first sign of labor started, I was like, oh, okay, it's time to do what I've been setting the intention to do for 10 months. So
Mm.
it was like, okay, now we're going to actually do this. And before we were telling our mind and our body, like we're priming, the baby's growing, we're going to get to this place and we're doing it. So it was a very like by the time I got to labor, my mind was like, yeah, like this is what we're doing. It was like on board. There was no questioning. Um, so that is what worked for me. And the other thing that I did is the room that you're going to give birth in. I didn't have this room until like three months before I gave birth to my daughter. But I would go and I would set intentions in that room. And I would just use prayer. I really believe in prayer. Whatever your method of blessing the space you want to bring your baby in is, um, doing that and just energizing what you do want. I think that is really important. We have power on what we think and how we choose to perceive something. So energizing what you do want, and holding that very dearly and not letting other people tamper with that because people will want to tamper with it. But it's also like being convicted and trusting yourself. I think there's no greater time for a woman to trust herself besides when she's pregnant and in the birth portal. It's like it's a it's a truly a active process. It's a really active process.
Yeah. Surrendering is also an active action. Like a lot of people
Mm,
don't think or see it like that, but surrender is actually, it's so brave, it's so powerful. It is like the ultimate feminine superpower to
mm,
choose that. It's an action, like you do that. It's actively choosing that, isn't it? It's not a giving up, like it's a
mm.
surrendering to and leaning into. Yeah. Thank you so
It's
much.
interesting. One of the things I've heard about surrender is never give up, give it up.
Yeah.
So it's like you're holding that it's like you're sitting in that and you're moving through that, but you're not giving up, you're just giving it all up and you're just in it.
Yeah, there's such a beauty in surrender, like surrender, but like releasing that, like you can feel it deeply within you and you sense into that. It's beautiful, so powerful. I love it.
Mhm.
Love it. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your beautiful birthing wisdom.
Thank you for having me. It's surreal to be doing this because I cannot tell you how many episodes I've listened to on my walks while pregnant. And the episodes I've listened to on your podcast have been really helpful, like filling my mind with just positive birth stories was
Mm,
just really also part of that like active surrender I was able to do at birth. So thank you for having me.
thank Thank you for listening. If you love this podcast, then please consider sharing it, leave a review, or make a contribution on our Patreon page. And if you want to connect on social media, then find the podcast on Instagram as the Natural Birth Podcast. Thank you for listening.